Okay, it seems like everyone's settled, so we might as well get going. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to talk to everyone about this resource. I know some of you have probably been attending the Democracy Exchange conference over the last couple of days and are probably a little bit tired of listening to people talk. So this is going to be hopefully a pretty quick and conversational half hour about a classroom resource that we're really excited about. So I am Michelle Thompson, and I am the Manager of Legal and Digital Development for the Ontario Justice Education Network, or OJEN for short. OJEN is a nonprofit that serves the entire province of Ontario, and what we do centers around public legal education and information for youth. So we do that in a couple of different ways. One of the big ones is by supporting high school teachers who want to use law in their classrooms. So Ontario is one of the few provinces in Canada that has a dedicated law curriculum on the books, but we also work a fair bit with civics teachers, sometimes in family studies, sometimes in career counseling. And then we also work outside of the school system with youth that we meet in community settings. So in those cases, mostly we're facilitating conversations about the legal system, particularly around issues that are likely to affect youth who are marginalized or vulnerable in one way or another. So a great example of our core programs is our mock trials. Mock trials were some of OJEN's first programs. We're almost 20 years old as an organization, and these were one of the first things that came through. They exemplify our general approach to teaching law to young people. They are participatory, they're highly experiential, they're really fun, and they really give students an opportunity to step into the role of someone working in the legal system. They tend to focus on classic areas of law. We have at this point, I think, almost a dozen in criminal law alone, including bail hearings, sentencing hearings, youth criminal justice court, adult criminal justice, and some civil areas as well. We have ones in family law mediation, we have one for the Landlord and Tenant Board, the Human Rights Tribunal. And so they focus on these specific areas of law, and they also help students learn about the really technical details of the court process, evidentiary issues, process issues, all that kind of stuff. So when the legal community started talking about access to justice as a dedicated phenomena, we had to do a little bit of thinking about how we would reflect that in our programs. And there's a couple of reasons that teaching access to justice is a challenge. One is that it really requires systems thinking, which means not just looking at individual cases and making decisions about how rules should be applied to that specific one atomized case, but looking at the way a system functions as a whole, looking at the sum of all these small decisions over a large timeline for large numbers of people. This is something that can, I think, be pretty challenging for a lot of people. And to be able to dig into that, you really need a fairly detailed understanding of both what the needs of people who are having legal problems are, and also what the landscape of services and resources is like. And on top of that, you have to understand a little bit about context, about what it's like to be an adult person, not just in 2020, but any year, trying to manage all the stuff that comes up in life and also take on legal conflict on top of it. One of the most important functions of this conversation, we realized, was going to have to be helping students think about systems, especially the legal system, not as natural or inevitable, phenomena that we couldn't do anything about, but rather as the result of a series of policy choices and of legacies that are old and inherited, but also that are constantly changing. So we were faced with this question, which is how to tell the story of the legal system, and particularly the ways that people are trying to access justice, what's out there, which is fundamentally a story about constraints in a lot of ways. But we also want to be able to offer resources. We don't want this to be purely a defeatist thing. We want it to be something that pushes students forward into analysis and thinking and leaves them a little bit better resourced afterwards than they were before. So we created the Access to Justice game, which is the main thing that I want to talk about with you today. Oops. Back one. So one of the core questions that we wanted to solve with our design of this game is how do people find legal help when they have a common legal problem? It's worth mentioning here that we sort of made the choice early on to define the access to justice thing that we're trying to teach about as pretty narrowly access to legal services that people need to navigate the legal system. There's lots of other competing definitions of access to justice. And in fact, as you'll see, some of what we debrief with students after doing this exercise is about whether we think this is sufficient or is it just a necessary starting place. So the first version of the Access to Justice game that we pulled together was very much designed to try to put students in the role of acting as either a character with a common legal problem or as a real-world legal service provider. The main function of the game, which we call this the paper version, and it's meant to be played in a classroom or in a community space by young people who can sort of work with a reasonable reading level of content. Students playing characters will visit other stations, which are different legal service providers, in any order they want, talking to those service providers and trying to get help with their legal issue. So what we have in the mix, we have a scenario for family law. We have a character who's trying to get help with a wrongful dismissal claim, and we have a character who's facing eviction from their rental housing. And for the students who aren't playing characters but are instead playing the legal service providers, they are seated around the room with a label of what their location is, and they have instruction sheets that detail the ways that they can help the characters who come to them looking for help. And everything is crafted in such a way that it really, really closely mirrors the real world counterparts, the constraints and the opportunities that they have when they're working with the public. So characters win when they get enough legal help and information to successfully get their case into the formal justice system. So in some cases that might be, filing your correct paperwork with the court. In one case, that's getting your case before the landlord and tenant board. We're not following any of these through to the end of hearings and everything. That's a whole bunch of legal and process content that's outside the scope of this game. It's really just, can you get to a place where you know your issue is going to be heard and you're going to get a resolution? So an important feature of this game is that students need to be able to track both the time that they have spent and also how much money they have. There's a moving money mechanic where after each visit to a station, students get a chance card that represents some sort of thing that happens in regular life. So they might gain some money from that, they might lose some money, they might need to have a 2-minute timeout because they got stalled because whatever, their car broke down. But they're meant to simulate the sort of other stuff that keeps life keeps happening when you have a legal problem, and that's not separate from resolving your legal problem in the first place. So the stations that we have that students can visit include a law firm, a community legal clinic, calling Legal Aid Ontario, calling the Lawyer Referral Service, which is run by the Law Society of Ontario, going to ask for help at the courthouse or the landlord and tenant board, looking on the government website. So this would be, either the Ministry of the Attorney General or the NCSCS website for family law, looking at a public legal information group. So that might be a site like Clio's Steps to Justice resource, and going to a community center, which is likely to have, a lot of in-house resources, also sometimes social or community workers who can help problem solve various issues. And just on the bottom here, I want to show you what the paper instructions actually look like. So the frame on the left here is the overall setup instructions, and you can see the employment scenario, which is an example of the sheet that you give to a student who's playing a character. And then on the right is a set of instructions for the student who is playing the legal clinic, just so you can see how that's all laid out. So the main thing that students are doing is walking around the room, interacting with other students, doing this little bit of role play. But to really get a lot out of this game, we found that we need to do some really intentional framing up front and some debriefing afterwards. So we all do the opening a little bit differently, and we have a guide for teachers that suggests a way of framing and introducing it, although teachers know better than us how this needs to be presented to their class. But essentially, what you're looking at on screen right now are the beats that we like to hit in the introduction to this game. So number one, civil legal problems are incredibly common. Most of your students, most young people will not end up going through a criminal process personally, although lots will. Almost all of them will eventually be involved in a dissolution of a family unit, or problems with a bad landlord, or problems with a bad boss. Almost all of us, if typically when we do this with a group of adults, every adult at one of those three things that I listed, you see that, yes, that was me. So that's one thing we want to stress. About half of adults over any 3-year period in Canada will have a significant civil legal problem. Number 2, people don't end up getting legal help because it's expensive, time-consuming, and it feels intimidating or futile, or people just don't know where to start. I didn't just make up those factors. Those are well reported in the research. This is all reflective of current research on access to justice issues. This is an interesting point. So students tend to have, people kind of know lawyers are expensive, but when we ask the question of what do you think it costs to actually litigate a relatively simple civil law matter that maybe goes to like a 1-day hearing, typically answers start around a couple $100, and there's only been 1 or 2 times that I've ever done this game that students have ever guessed as high as the answer actually is, which is the range is between $6,000 and $37,000 in legal fees alone. So it's interesting because people have this felt understanding that lawyers are expensive, but having the actual number in front of you is quite different. And then we want to talk about how legal aid can really be incredibly helpful, including in civil stuff. It's not just for criminal law, but it's only for people with very low incomes. And so right now, for example, I think the legal aid rates are for a single person, $17,700, and going up to, for a family of 4, I think it's about $42,000. It's always worth it to check the Legal Aid Ontario website and find out the most current rates, but I think that's what it is as of today. And so a way that we make that relatable to young people, because it's very abstract, is if you make minimum wage in Ontario working a full-time job, you make too much money to qualify for most legal aid services. And students tend to take that fact with some surprise. And I think it's harrowing to them both that you can imagine such a gap between who can afford that $6,000 to $37,000 and who qualifies for legal aid, and also that a lot of people qualify for legal aid, a lot of people on social assistance, a lot of people who are working. There's still a huge number of people who fall into that category. And finally, the last big framing thing we want to ask is, what does it mean for us as a system, right? So this is that system thinking. If people can't get good help with issues related to their families, their jobs, or their housing. So we tend to kind of let this question float in the air because it also is going to help us structure our debrief at the end, once students have this much more information about how all of these different legal service providers actually operate. So in our debrief, after students have had the chance to play the game, we tend to prompt with questions. Things like, what was it like? Was it frustrating? Was it easy? How did it feel to have to tell your story over and over again to all these different service providers? What helped you succeed? There is a very, very low chance, but one of the chance cards that students can get is essentially you have a windfall of several $1,000s and you can essentially just go hire a lawyer and fix your problem. So it can be really productive for a student to put up their hand and say, well, money rained down from the sky, and so I was able to manage my issue. And you as the facilitator can sort of say, well, how often do we think that happens? Is that a good solution? So there's something really productive about hearing from a group of students how all their different paths resolved. There are multiple different paths to success for each character that are reflective of real life paths that they could choose. So that's a really productive discussion. Do you think your character will be happy with the outcome of their case? One of the scenarios, Dallas, who is the person who's being evicted from their housing, might, you know, the odds even after getting access to justice in this sense are decently good that they would still be evicted depending on what else is going on. So we want to talk about how it's not curative, but it is essential to be able to access this kind of help. Again, we want to reiterate, what does it mean for our system if in all these core areas where people have to interact with the courts because of how the law is structured, we're not also providing them with the resources they need to do that? What's the impact of that over the long term? And finally, what can we do about this situation? This tends to be really productive. Students have really creative and sometimes very focused solutions. You know, it's easy to say more money for legal aid, but there's also a lot more than that students end up coming up with when they know the specifics. So we have a new version of this game that we're just launching now, and I'm so excited to show it, which is the digital version of the Access to Justice game. So this has been a really, really successful in-person activity, but there are some things that can be a little bit tricky to run about it. The facilitator needs to have a fairly good grasp on the rules, on how to account for time and money and all that stuff, and a pretty good understanding of what all the legal service providers are. And that's not a given. Honestly, when we were developing this, it even became clear that a lot of people in their third year of law school or even practicing private bar lawyers actually don't have a really granular understanding of all the differences between what a community legal clinic does versus Legal Aid Ontario versus the lawyer referral service. And so we can automate all of that with the digital game and also create something that maybe is easier for teachers and facilitators to use in this year, especially when we're doing so much of our learning remotely. So what you see here is a still from the Digital Access to Justice game. We worked with 2 independent game developers and artists named Squinky and Carolyn Zhang, who were incredible to work with and gave us this nice pixel art. And we have essentially a playable digital version of the game out now for free. So I want to take just 5 minutes right now and run through a tiny bit of that game with you guys. I'm going to switch over to my browser here. There we go. Hopefully everyone can see the actual game itself. Okay, so clicking through, we can select from the 3 scenarios. Jean is a family law issue, Jamie is an employment law issue, and Dallas is housing. I'm gonna choose Jean just because I know her story up front is the shortest for time. So Jean is a construction worker. She has 2 kids with her common law partner, Pat. Jean works from 8 to 6 every weekday, so for the last 2 years, Pat has stayed home and taken care of the kids. He hasn't had a job during that time. Recently, Jean found out that Pat started drinking during the day. I'm clicking to advance. There we go. He used to be responsible for picking up groceries and household necessities, but lately he's been unreliable. When Jean started finding empty liquor bottles in their recycling bin, she refused to give him any more money. It turned into a big fight, and Pat told her that he was leaving. Because he'd been the kid's primary caregiver for years, the kids left with him. The next week, Pat applies for social assistance and also got a lawyer through legal aid. As caregiver, Pat wants to get an official parenting plan that will let the children live with him permanently. He also asked Jean for child support payments so that even if he's unemployed, he can make sure the children are okay. When Jean gets a demand letter from Pat's lawyer asking for money, she is furious. She goes to the apartment where Pat is staying and they have another huge fight. As their voices get louder, one of Pat's neighbors threatens to call the police. As Jean leaves, Pat says he will only talk to her through his lawyer. This makes it really hard for Jean to arrange visits with her kids. She tries for a couple of weeks, but Pat cancels their visits about half the time. Jean is stressed out and performing badly at work, and her boss is starting to notice. She needs something to change. It will be hard to negotiate a custody arrangement or child support with Pat since he isn't willing to talk. Jean has $800 in her checking account. She isn't sure how much it would cost to hire a lawyer, but she's pretty sure she can't afford it. Jean's best friend Peter is studying to be a paralegal. He emails her a list of options to help with her legal issues. So one of the liberties that we've taken in Jean's scenario is giving her a friend who gives her a list of suggestions about where to go. It's worth talking about with students that, most litigants don't actually start with that. So even sort of the options we're providing right off the bat are a little more generous than most people are actually starting out with. So you can see on this screen at the top, we have it's day 1, $800 is how much Jean has in the bank right now. And those things are gonna track automatically. So as we advance time, as we gain or lose money, that is all gonna be automatically encapsulated here. So Jean has a lot of options. Who should she talk to next? So these are Jean's options in the physical space. She can go check at the courthouse, she can go to the community center, the law firm, At home, she can make calls or check on the internet for a couple of things, or a community legal clinic. Now, I am going to ask if anyone would like to drop into Q&A and make a suggestion about where Jean should go first. I'll give it a couple of seconds, and then I'll just make a choice. So again, the options were a courthouse, a community center, a community legal clinic, a law firm, or looking on the internet. Okay, I see one came through the legal clinic. Okay, perfect. So Jean looks at the website for Legal Aid Ontario and sees that there's a community legal clinic in her area. It's a small building just a few blocks away from the courthouse. It closes at 5 o'clock, so at 4, she tells her boss she's feeling sick and needs to leave early. So in this small bit of text that, this isn't key, this isn't a huge structural thing, we try to have all these little bits that imply things about what Jean is experiencing as she goes through this process, including most legal services will operate the same office hours that most other people are working their jobs. So there's a whole other layer of stuff to navigate there. So in this case, she tells her boss she's feeling sick. So when you click on one of these locations, like I just did, you're gonna get the interior of the space, and all these are different for the different locations. The waiting room of the community legal clinic is full. Jean approaches the reception desk, where she'll talk to this worker, says, "Hi, can I help you?" Jean says, "I need to talk to a lawyer about some legal problems I'm having." The worker says, "Sure, can you tell me your postal code so I can see if you're in our area of service?" So here you can see us going through the process of what actually happens when you go into a legal clinic. And some of this is a little bit tedious, but we're trying to do it so that if and when people actually end up having to do it themselves, it feels familiar. People are so much more likely to follow referrals and go through and try to get help where you suggest that they can, if they have a sense of what to expect when they get there. So that's part of why this context is here. So you're in our area? Great. What type of legal problem is it? Jean says, "It's about my kids. Their dad and I just split up and now he wants money from me. Half the time he won't let me see them." He interrupts, "Oh, it's a family law issue. We don't do family law here." "Yeah, sorry, we get people asking for help with family issues all the time," which is true. "I think there might be a place at the courthouse that could help you. They're probably closed now since it's 5, but do you want me to give you the name and number?" So you can choose yes, please, or no, thanks. I'm gonna choose yes, please, just to show you what it looks like to get a referral. So he's gonna look it up on the computer. Okay, it's called a Family Law Information Center, FLIX. Many of you will probably be familiar with. It looks like the best thing to do is just go there in person. Their office is in the courthouse up the street. "Yeah, I passed it on my way here, and they'll be able to help me? I'm not sure, but it's worth checking." "Okay, good luck." So that's the end of that. Meanwhile, so this is the kind of screen that will populate in between each of the visits. These are the ones that simulate what in the paper version of the game used to be the chance card. So this is stuff, this is life happening in between you're trying to work on your legal problem. So Jean is at her best friend Peter's house at midnight on a Friday when her phone rings. She checks caller ID and sees that it's Pat's. She doesn't know why he's calling, but she's worried that something is wrong with her kids. Pat leaves her a voicemail. She listens to it. He says he misses her and he wants her to call in, but he sounds drunk. She knows she can't believe anything he says when he has been drinking. She decides it's better not to call him back. She's glad her kids are okay, but the whole thing still makes her angry and sad. She apologizes to Peter and goes home. So that particular one, those are randomized. So unfortunately, I couldn't choose one for you to show that had, Jean works overtime and makes an extra $100 or spends a bunch of money on something. But those are the kinds of things that we have inserted to help humanize this experience and make it not just a robotic, like, let me click through and just try to optimize my route. So if we were playing this full scenario, if this were an hour-long session instead of a half-hour one, we might try the next thing. We might try going to the law firm or the community center or the courthouse, since we got that referral, and go try to find that family law information center. So this is the way that we hope students are going to be able to explore what the horizon of legal services actually looks like and what's available to different people. I'm going to just flip back to my PowerPoint for a moment here. That's the one I want. So the Access to Justice game online, that version is available at ojen.ca/access to justice game. And if you're at all interested in this, it really is worth playing around with a couple of the scenarios. Like I said, there's the 3. They each take about 15 to 20 minutes to get through on average. Some of them can be shorter. And as I said, there are multiple paths to success for each different character. So there's a lot to explore there, and it is all so closely drawn from real life and real people's experiences. The last thing that I wanted to talk about before we see if there are any questions is what we learned. And some of this is anecdotal and reflective of my experience doing this game over and over again with students. I've probably done this 30 times at this point with different groups of youth. It's become by far my favorite thing to run in OJEN programs, partially because of the conversations we get to have. So one of the things that is most stunning to me is that, man, students really want to know how things actually work. There's just something different in the air when students feel like they're getting the inside, honest, actual scoop on not how things are supposed to work or how the Supreme Court says that things should work, but what actually happens. What are people out there doing right now? It really is a special kind of learning, I think, that I see being activated in students when you are engaging them like that. Another thing that's become clear from working with this a lot is there is a lot of ambient information out there about law. Partially this is a function of the fact that we tend to work with students who are already taking law or interested in justice issues, but there's a lot. There's so much in the news, there's so much on the internet, there's so much that comes through family and friends' experiences. And most of that information is sort of polarizing in one way or another. I really find that students, you will mostly be talking to students who already have a sort of opinion or a sense of what the justice system is about, regardless of when you meet them. However, interestingly, regardless of in what direction that has been polarized, I would say a sort of gut level mistrust for the justice system is almost universal. Yeah, not trusting lawyers is like, is folk knowledge at this point. But what's interesting about that is that regardless of where people are starting from, and this is true of both youth and adults, a lot of the details are lacking. So sometimes there's a mix of myth and reality that's been floating around, or there's a sense of, you know, we avoid the eye of the legal system under any circumstances without a lot of really granular understanding of why. And I think it starts to mend a lot of the anxieties and some of the misunderstandings and misinformation that goes in all directions, regardless of where you're getting your information from. To start filling in those really specific, what are legal aid rates? How does legal aid work? That sort of stuff I think is really important for students being able to articulate both their own view of what their legal system should be and what it's like to operate within it. We've learned that even teachers have gaps in what they actually know about this stuff. As I just said, lawyers also do, so it's no surprise, but it also, I think, is really positive for people who are working on teaching law in various ways to be really, really clear themselves about what actually is out there, especially for people who fall into the majority of us who can't just pay for a lawyer out of pocket. Students ask better questions and propose better solutions when they understand the details of a problem. That should be no surprise. And the last biggest one that I want to raise, because we're specifically speaking at an event about restoring trust in our democratic systems, we have found that honesty builds trust. That includes not making things out to be worse than they are, and also not making things out to be better than they are. We found overwhelmingly that students can handle the idea that there are gaps, and also there are a lot of people working really hard to try to fill those gaps, and that work continues. So that is our overview of the Access to Justice game. Up here is our contact information. If you have any interest in getting in touch or exploring our resources, everything we do is free and freely available. And if you want to learn more about the Access to Justice game, these are the links that you can use right down here. So I'm just going to check if we have any questions in the Q&A. I know that was a little bit whirlwind, but if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A section. I'll hold on for a second, but also I have blown past my 30 minutes of time. So for those who can't hang around, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your interest in this subject. Thank you for teaching law and engaging with us on important issues facing our democracy. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come through, so that's totally great. Thanks once more to everyone who attended and joined us today. I know it's a really stressful, hectic time for a lot of people, and carving out 30 minutes to listen to someone rant about a resource is not everyone's idea of a good time, but I'm really glad that we were able to share it. And I wish everyone a great weekend.